Okay, so this is the fourth time I have started to record this video. The first time I actually got all the way through it and all the way through the next video, and I realized that after a few minutes of the first one, the microphone batteries went flat. So I literally had about 20 or 30 minutes of just total silence. And I figured that wasn't going to be very informative, so take two. I then started recording again a little while ago and realized that my camera battery was about to go flat, so I replaced that. The third time was actually going okay, but then my kids decided to start sort of walking around over my head, and we've got wooden floors, and so I thought that might be a bit distracting. And so here we are, fourth time. Fingers crossed, let's see how we go. I wanted to talk briefly about the sections, the big sections of the Bible, because I guess it's informative to just understand a little bit about the context of what it is you're reading, sort of what rough sections the Bible finds itself in, so that you can appreciate that there are different styles, that there are different various formats within the Bible and how they are chunked together. Now, that said, as it turns out, I live under a flight path, so if you notice planes going overhead, I'm just going to barrel on because, to be honest, recording the same thing 4 times is, it's starting to get a little tedious. So let's start. New Testament, Old Testament, the biggest chunks, segments of the Bible. Old Testament, New Testament. Old Testament is going to take you from creation all the way through to the end of the prophets. Not saying that there are no prophets, I'm saying the end of the prophets so far as the Bible is concerned. And that will generally be described as the time preceding Christ's birth on earth. Okay? The New Testament, starting with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and all the way through to Revelation, is going to be the section that starts at Christ's birth and continues on through to where the Bible finishes. That said, what I want you to appreciate is that the entire Bible is in fact about Jesus, and I want you to not get in the mindset that you should only fixate on the New Testament because that's where Jesus is and that there's nothing to be gained from the Old Testament. I think that would be a bad call, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to just talk about the big segments. So let's start at the start and work our way through. The Old Testament commences with 5 books. You might hear them called the Pentateuch. You don't need to use that word, and I don't intend to use it again. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. These are the first 5 books of the Bible. They are sometimes called the law books, or the books of Moses, or the books of the law. Various formats. What you will find is that these are the very early history. So from creation through to the very early days, the formation of Israel, its slavery in Egypt, and a few things that happened along the way there. Okay, this is where you will find things like the 10 Commandments. This is where you will find various laws. This is where you'll find various rules that people have a tendency to quote when it comes to things in the Old Testament. So that is a place where you're going to find that. They are chunked together like that because the next section really deals with history. Okay, so we've got the first 5 there, the very old history, and then we've got Israel and its more historical development through its kings and through its various journeys and battles and other things like that. So that's I'm going to read this from notes, by the way. If you see me glancing down, it's because the chances that I'm going to miss something are fairly high. So we've got Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Okay, so Joshua all the way through to Esther is going to give you more history, and they are often chunked together. So these have a tendency to tell a lot of story. This is where you find a lot of the history of Israel. This is where you will find King David and King Saul and King Solomon. This is where you'll find Samuel the prophet and how he interacted. This is where you'll find a lot of the prophets you may have heard of, like Elijah and Elisha. Okay, that's the section about them. Has a lot to do with Israel as a nation and its development and its times, I guess, where it followed the Lord and sought after him and honored him, and its times where it did not. So there's a lot in there. The next section is the poetry books. Okay, and it starts with a book that a lot of people find very confronting, which is called Job, which is a book about suffering. It's sort of poetry. It's poetic in its style, but it is in this main sort of chunk. I don't think you need to read too much into what chunk these books are in. It's just a helpful guide. Okay, so you've got Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and then Song of Songs. And these form the books of poetry. And if you read them, that's how you will see them as well. You will see that they are laid out slightly differently. You will see that within them they have a slightly different purpose. So a lot of the earlier books were designed principally to tell a story, okay? They are historical, but what you find as you enter into the books of poetry is a slightly different tone, you find a slightly different purpose, and you find a slightly different layout. Okay, I'll let you explore them for yourself because I don't want to go into huge detail about these. But Job, through Songs of Solomon, this is books of poetry, okay? Or books of wisdom. Some people call them the writings. There are various other ways you could phrase it, but that is what those books have. Next we have the prophets, okay? There are 17 books of the prophets, and they're going to take us all the way through to the end of the Old Testament. So we have the major prophets and the minor prophets. Don't get caught up in that definition. They're all important, but you'll see as you look into them why they might be called the major and minor prophets. The major prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. In fact, Lamentations is written by Jeremiah, so that's not their names. That's the names of the books in the Bible. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel are your major prophets. And these are very rich books. What you have a tendency to find that these books have some story in them, but they also have a lot of imagery in them because of the way in which the prophets were communicated with by the Lord and the nature of the messages that they had to give. You will sometimes find here a lot of visions and a lot of descriptive language, and some people can find these challenging to deal with. But again, there is a lot of rich information in here, and there is certainly a lot of insight into the Lord in these books and how he works and how he communicates and what is coming, and how he attempted to deal and send messages to his people during these times. The minor prophets, and a lot of people will have heard of some of these, in particular, you will have heard of Jonah, probably, but these ones, sometimes people gloss over them, but I don't think that's a correct thing to do. So we've got Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. I nearly said Malachi there because of a Colin Buchanan song, but managed to catch myself just in time. Malachi is the last book in the Old Testament. So the minor prophets, there are 12 of them. They will take you through to the end of the Old Testament. So, what then? New Testament. You probably already know, and I've mentioned it before, that the New Testament starts with what people just call the Gospels, okay? And these are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are named after their authors, and each of them contains what is essentially the story of Christ as they witnessed it or as they gathered information about it, in the case of Luke, from eyewitnesses at the time. These are the places to go principally to learn about the life of Jesus on earth, his birth, his life, his death, and his resurrection. So that is why a lot of people focus a lot of information on these, because these are the primary resources we have regarding Christ himself as he was in this place. But again, like I said before, as you start to explore, what you'll find is the whole Bible is about Jesus, and there are a lot more places that you can find to illustrate what Jesus was here for, what he was like, and how he is sovereign. Okay, after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have the Acts of the Apostles. I'm sort of putting this by itself. This is the beginning and development of the early church. Okay, so it commences essentially with Jesus after his resurrection when he ascended to heaven, and it goes through then the gifting of the Holy Spirit and the development of the church and the persecution of it, and how the church functioned as the body of Christ, how it got there and worked together, how it resolved dispute, how it sort of had its to's and fro's, how it was persecuted and scattered. And it is, for many people, an essential part in learning discipleship, because what it demonstrates more clearly than probably any other book is what the early church actually did, so far as it working with itself and so far as the spread of the gospel was concerned. And that's why it was one of the two books I recommended for those who were brand new to the Bible. I recommended Luke and Acts. And I did that because Acts is written by Luke. So there is a consistency of style and language in there that some people find beneficial because they don't need to start thinking in different ways as they're reading. After that, we have letters. Essentially, the majority of the rest of the Bible up until Revelation at least is letters from people to other people. Many of them are written by Paul, who we are introduced to in Acts. If you want to get fancy, some people call them the Pauline letters, but I don't think you need to. And these are insight into teaching and instruction that was given from the apostles to the early church, perhaps in response to things that were coming up, perhaps as exhortations or further teachings or encouragement. They cover a raft of different issues that came up in the early church, and they are very instructive from that perspective. So they are Romans, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, Timothy, Titus, Philemon. Okay, these are the letters written by Paul, in particular, to the various different churches that he had been involved with along the way. After that, we have letters written by other people. So the first one you're going to come across is Hebrews. And Hebrews, not everyone agrees who wrote it. Some people think Paul wrote it, some people don't. I don't love to get caught up in that because it's not that important to me. You can consider for yourself what you think about that. But Hebrews has a lot of rich descriptive language in it, particularly regarding the nature of Christ and regarding what he came to do and how he functioned in that way. After Hebrews are letters written by other people. So James, Peter, 2 letters from Peter, 3 letters from John, 1, 2, 3 John, and Jude. Okay, and that will take you all the way through to Revelation. Revelation is a complicated book for many people. It deals essentially with the description of a vision given to John, so back in our Gospels, John, when he was provided an extensive vision concerning a lot of things to do with the heavens, okay? And there is a lot in Revelation that people find very challenging, and particularly new Christians have a tendency to shy away from it because it can be the subject of a lot of speculation and a certain degree of crazy from some people, but within it, what you will find is a lot of instructive information regarding Christ in particular, regarding Christ at the time of judgment, and regarding what will happen in the end times. A lot of people think Revelation focuses only on the end times. I'm not 100% sure that that's exclusively true, but certainly there is a large amount of information about that in there. But you do need to be cautious reading it, and of course you need to be appreciative of what it does and does not mean. And generally speaking, I don't encourage too many people to get caught up in the vast numbers of opinions out there regarding, oh, if you look at this, that happened, and this is this, and that aligns with that, and this is probably that. If you are a new disciple of Christ in particular, while I encourage you to certainly read Revelation and have an appreciation for what is in there, you could very easily become distracted and consumed by an intellectual debate concerning Revelation. And I'm just not sure that that's beneficial for most people. There are some people who will devote themselves to study and reflection of Revelation, and I'm not saying they're doing the wrong thing necessarily, but if they're doing that to the exclusion of sharing the gospel, equipping the church, and other things that perhaps are more immediately beneficial, I'll use that word, then I'm not sure that's always the right decision. That is all I had to say. That is the sections of the entire Bible. Like you can see, it's not too complicated. You just need to appreciate what you're reading. If you're reading Psalms, you're probably going to notice that it's different to Hebrews. And if you're reading Hebrews, you're going to notice it's different to Joshua. And Joshua is different to Daniel. Okay, they have different elements in them, and you will notice they come at things from different perspectives. That's all I wanted to do for this one. They are the sections of the Bible in very brief overview form, and hopefully I didn't miss any out because that'd be truly embarrassing, but it happens sometimes. So that is it, and I'll see you next time.